President Kennedy was assassinated today in downtown Dallas.
On the 50th anniversary of that tragic day, MSNBC.
And you felt that there was a sense that we were young and vital. And I think I remember famously what Pat Moynihan said when Mary McGrory had said, we will never laugh again. And Senator Moynihan said, we'll laugh again, but we'll never be young again. I mean, I think we can recapture youth too, but it was a remarkable day and a remarkable time for America.
It was 50 years ago today, and we will have more here on CBS This Morning as we continue.
As he flips through old pictures and drawings, the rabbi remembers making many visits to Ruby's cell. You had many conversations with him.
Oh, many conversations.
And the kinds of things he would tell you.
He kept telling me that it was not a conspiracy. He acted alone.
Did Jack Ruby ever tell you?
He never said that. I asked him that point blank. Did you ever see Oswald? Did you ever meet Oswald? Were you ever in his company? And he denied it every time I talked to him.
Denied it as if he meant it. I mean, there's no question in your mind that he was telling the truth.
No question about it. He never knew him, never met him. He did it in a fit of anger. He was outraged. He was also looking for respectability. He thought that would bring him a lot of admiration.
Jack Ruby also told the rabbi he shot Lee Harvey Oswald for Jackie Kennedy, so she wouldn't have to come back to Dallas for a trial.
What an interesting perspective.
I did it for the American people. He thought he would be appreciated.
And so that Jackie wouldn't have to come back for a trial.
And we used to hear that Jackie thing back then, but the thought that he did it for the American people.
And he repeated this many times to the rabbi.
That's what raises more questions.
Well, there's so many questions associated with this whole thing to begin with. You know? But this is an interesting perspective because this is the man who spent hours and hours and hours with him in jail, 2-3 times a week.
By the way, did Rabbi Silverman spend a lot of time with the Warren Commission?
He did.
He did.
He did. But the way that worked was they sent somebody to him to ask him a series of questions, and then they took that back to the Warren Commission.
Oh, I bet.
And as you mentioned, it's Jonathan Silverman's father.
It is.
How about that?
Yeah.
All right.
I was hoping he would live.
We looked over and our teacher was crying, and she broke out, well, literally these words, "They killed him, they killed the president."
I want to bring in Senator Patrick Leahy, Democrat from Vermont, Hendrik Hertzberg, senior editor and columnist with The New Yorker, and Holly Millay, an Elle columnist and author of the ebook 7 Seconds, Memories of the JFK Assassination, the tragedy that changed America. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
We all do remember I was in my first grade class. I had never seen the nun look like that at my Catholic grade school when she told us that the president had been shot and then sent us home because he had been killed. Senator, where were you when you got the news?
I was a student at Georgetown Law School, and I was in the library. Somebody came in and told me I can, to this day, I remember it like it was just an hour ago.
It's amazing how vivid it is, isn't it? Not just that moment, but the hours after. I remember going home, and I was shocked. I had never seen my mother cry.
I went home, and my wife was a nurse and working at the VA hospital. She'd been on night duty, so she was sleeping and pounding on the door, our apartment in Washington, say, you know, they killed him, they killed him. And we turned on the news just in time to see the confirmation of the most horrible news, and two of us just sat there holding hands and crying.
Rick, you were a student at Harvard. You were a big fan of Kennedy's. What do you remember about that day?
Well, I remember I'd gotten up late. I always got up late because I'd have been up all night working on the Crimson, the school paper. It was about 11:30 in the morning, and I was taking a shower, and I heard a radio very, very faintly through the wall saying somebody had been shot. It sounded like somebody important, and somehow I got the idea that it was Francisco Franco, the dictator of Spain, and I thought, well, that's not so bad. I got out of the shower, I turned on our little television, our little black and white television, and that was when I found out. That was how I found out. And I just sank to our couch there in my room, numb, sat there for 2 hours. President Kennedy's death was announced. You know, I looked out the window, and there were people wandering in the courtyard, stunned, and there was a boy I remember leaning against a tree and weeping.
There was something about that moment that we do still all talk about it still. We remember it so profoundly still. Holly, you interviewed a lot of cultural icons for their thoughts. Robert Redford was 27 at the time. He said, "I had the cab driver pull over and let me out. I remember walking around Central Park trying to make sense of it, and then to go and have to perform a comedy that night with this going on and trying to think of every line before I said it. I had to double think every line of the performance." Barbara Streisand, I think, was also got out. She saw her ex-husband, and she got out in Central Park. When you talk to these folks, was there a commonality?
Well, the thing that struck me as interesting is that everyone touched on something different, whether it's, you know, Robert Redford brought in what happened on Broadway that night. He was starring in Barefoot in the Park. Barbara Streisand had just purchased a Victorian diamond choker, and it was like her first big purchase, and she was so proud of it. And she heard the news on the radio in the jewelry shop, and she said, you know, she got in the cab and saw her then husband Elliot Gould sitting on a bench in Central Park, got out of the cab, and she said, "And do you know, to this day I've never been able to wear that choker." I mean, everybody touched on different things, like Meryl Streep brought up the bomb. They thought, should we all dive under our desks? They were so confused. Ryan O'Neal brought up the Vietnam War. Chuck Close brought up, you know, going through Yale, through the smoking room, which at the time, Yale, very, very conservative, and seeing the law students actually raise a toast to the death of John F. Kennedy. And so I was stunned. Everybody brought something different to this oral history.
Senator, 50 years later, when you look at John Kennedy, and he remains at the top of even the latest Gallup poll of living presidents by a wide margin, and not just for people like us who were alive and remember the assassination, but young people too. What would you like to say about his political legacy as people debate how great a president he was or wasn't? What do you think his biggest impact was?
He appealed to Americans, especially young Americans. He had this sense, I mean, none of us knew about the physical pain he was going through all that time, but he had such a sense of optimism. We can go to the moon, the Peace Corps. It made you want to be part of this. I remember as a student being at the White House when he came out to meet us, and just feeling thrilled, and boy, I can do anything. We can do anything. And today you have politicians who try to appeal to the lowest common denominator. He appealed to the best of all of us. The fact that there was such a huge number of people wanting to join the Peace Corps. It wasn't just the Peace Corps. This was John Kennedy's Peace Corps. And that kind of enthusiasm made us a better country. And we've got to go back to that. It's not a question whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. It's a question of what can you do to make yourself and your country better. It's not for nothing that people remember the ask not what you can do, or ask not what America can do for you or your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. And people really believed that and felt that. And it'd be nice if we could go back to that.
He did, Rick, have those, not just lines, not just those phrases, but there was something about watching him speak. The powerful nature, the lyrical nature, the beautiful words. Rick, you were a speechwriter for Jimmy Carter, so you have some, head speechwriter, I think. You have some understanding of politicians and speeches. What was it about him?
He was really educated. He'd really studied history. He had a real feel for language.
And poetry in particular.
And he was very careful. He chose Ted Sorensen as his #1 aide, and it was also his #1 speechwriter. And you can read about how they worked back and forth on the inaugural address, on the famous American University address, which is the last big important speech he gave. And when you're writing for a president, you always look to the collected speeches of John F. Kennedy for inspiration.
And Holly, JFK inspired, just as we heard from the senator, so many people to politics, including Jimmy Carter. And you talked to him as well, didn't you?
Well, he actually wrote something for me and sent it to me. And, you know, when you think, I mean, I love Jimmy Carter. I know you wrote speeches for him. When you think that he was a farmer, got down off his tractor and wept, and then became president himself and used the same desk that John Kennedy had used, and and also what he's done since he was president, starting Habitat for Humanity, building these homes, and that really also speaks and carries on the legacy of John Kennedy. I mean, I have to say, he really did inspire people at the time, but still inspires people.
President Carter told me about that day, too, and he said that it's important to remember that not everybody loved John F. Kennedy then, particularly down in Georgia. And the day after the assassination, he went to a football game. They'd refused to cancel it, and he remembered that when there was an announcement, asked for a moment of silence, lots of people booed. Lots of people booed.
That is one of the most startling things that I discovered reporting out this oral history, is because I was raised Catholic in South Dakota. I just grew up assuming he was beloved, and a hero to everyone. But so many of the people I interviewed brought up the division and the fact that he won the election by a smaller margin than the Gore-Bush election.
Yeah,
and
but
it's just all so surprising.
Yes, Senator?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, and I agree with that. We've heard, and those things did happen, but I also remember vividly when my wife Marcel and I stood on Pennsylvania Avenue with hundreds of thousands of people in dead silence. If you heard any sound at all, it was people sobbing. We were near the Capitol, yet we could hear the hoofbeats and the drums as the cortege left the White House. It was that silent, and people were just united in grief. I've not seen Washington like that except for one other time, and that was on 9/11.
Senator Leahy, Holly Milley, Hendrik Hertzberg, thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
A flash from Dallas. Two priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds. This is the latest information we have from Dallas. Of course, standing by to give you all available information as it comes to us. I will repeat with the greatest regret this flash. Two priests who were with President Kennedy say he has died of bullet wounds.
50 years ago today, the death of President John F. Kennedy was announced on airwaves across this country. His death, one of those few moments in history that's imprinted on the minds of Americans who lived that day. And today, under overcast skies in Northern Virginia, the eternal flame burns on JFK's gravesite. All day long, MSNBC will have special coverage as the nation pays tribute on this 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination. The official remembrances began this morning at Arlington National Cemetery, beginning with the playing of bagpipes. Bagpipes, a personal favorite of JFK's. They were also played at his funeral. Minutes later in Arlington, taps echoed through the cemetery as a wreath was placed at the site where the president now lies alongside his First Lady Jackie. This afternoon, Dallas will mark the day with a solemn ceremony in the plaza that JFK's motorcade passed just before the infamous shots rang out. Thousands will be there in attendance. Coming up in minutes from now, I'm going to be speaking with a woman who was just a girl when she witnessed JFK's murder. She took iconic photos of JFK's last moments. But right now, we want to get to the big political story. Special coverage, the assassination of President Kennedy. I'm going to speak to a woman who was just a young girl at the time when she witnessed that murder. She was forced to take cover as those shots rang out. And for today's big question, what is your "where were you" iconic moment? Now, for the greatest generation, that might be December the 7th. For millennials and Gen Xers, it's probably about 9/11. For boomers, it was about this day 50 years ago. But we want to hear yours. Chime in on Twitter and Facebook. You can also tweet us your thoughts on JFK to hashtag JFK 50 years. But first, We head to break with video taken during the 9 a.m. hour on this date back in 1963. President Kennedy made an impromptu appearance before a crowd waiting to see him outside the Hotel Texas.
There are no big hearts in Fort Worth.
Did you shake hands with the president? Yes, sir. What did you think of him?
Oh, I thought he was very distinguished. I've been President Kennedy since he was elected, and I think he was just so distinguished and so intelligent, and I'm so happy I got to see him.
What do you think of the president?
I think he's a wonderful man.
I appreciate your being here this morning. Mr. Kennedy is organizing yourself, taking longer. But because she looks better than we do.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Thomas Roberts. Good morning from here in Washington, D.C. And at just about this very moment, at 11:16 Eastern Time, 10:16 Central in Dallas, President Kennedy and his wife, Jackie, were returning to Suite 850 after giving what would be his last public speech inside the Grand Ballroom at the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth.
So this country, which desires only to be free, which desires to be secure, which desires to live at peace for 18 years under 3 different administrations, has borne more than its share of the burden, has stood watch for more than its number of years. I don't think that we are fatigued or tired. We would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it. We are still the keystone in the arch of freedom, and I think we will continue to do as we have done in our past, our duty, and the people of Texas will be in the lead. So I'm glad to come.
Just about 1 hour later, the President and First Lady would depart Fort Worth aboard Air Force One and head for Dallas, Texas. MSNBC's Alex Witt has a look at the scars the assassination of the President has left on that city.
1963 Dallas was a small town grown big. Of the nearly 700,000 residents, as many as a third of them turned out to see President Kennedy and Jackie make the sunny drive from Love Field through downtown Dallas, until the sound of rifle shots shattered everything, including the image of Dallas.
But Dallas was branded as a city of shame and a city of hate and all these ridiculous terms that didn't really apply to most people. And Dallas residents resented it.
Lee Harvey Oswald was not from Dallas or of Dallas, but the perception proved hard to shake.
It's just been decades of continuous reminders that, oh, this is the city that killed presidents. No, it's not. One guy did.
Time moves on. You know, people began to not blame the city, but to blame the right person. And especially after the Warren Commission report, to blame other things.
But Dallas bore that branding for a decade until 1972, when the Dallas Cowboys won their first Super Bowl championship and created the image as America's team. That was followed by the hit TV show Dallas, which captivated millions with its image of wealth and intrigue.
Dallas is such an easy place to live.
Dallas Mayor Michael Rawlings.
When people think today about Dallas, they think about business and what we do down here.
It's also become the Mecca for the curious and the sentimental.
It's amazing to see the history.
And continues to fascinate to the extreme, with some running into the street to stand on the spot where the president was assassinated. Most recognize the downtown Dallas skyline as an image of success and glamour. But for some, it will never obscure the dark day in Dealey Plaza.
Do you think of JFK?
Yes, I think that's probably the first thing that comes to mind.
Always.
Always.
I'm not sure we want to ever escape history. It's good to own history. It's something that you talk to your kids about.
Alex Witt, NBC News, Dallas.
So it was on that late November day around 12:30 in the afternoon Central Time that John F. Kennedy's motorcade turned the corner from Houston to Elm Street, with rows of Dallas residents standing on the side of the streets, Jackie Kennedy next to him in the back seat, everyone just trying to catch a glimpse of the first couple, and the first world-shattering shot ringing out, striking the young president in the head. First Lady Jackie could be seen desperately crawling for help atop the limousine, and our next guest bore witness to that moment that changed America forever. Tina Towner Pender, at just 13 years old, witnessed the assassination of JFK. Tina, thanks for joining me today, and we want to talk about that time in your life as just a young girl. You were standing in front of the Texas School Book Depository. You were filming the approach of the president's motorcade with your father. Tell me about why you and your dad were there and what memory vividly stands out to you from that day.
Well, my dad had shown me how to use the camera, an 8mm movie camera, so I knew how to use it, and I was focused on doing it correctly and keeping the camera still, and he would let me know when it was time to get ready to shoot the film. And we stepped into the street when he asked permission, a nearby policeman, if we could step into the street when the motorcade approached so we could take our film closer. And that's what we did. I stood right there on the corner and panned the motorcade, or actually just the limousine, as it turned around the corner, and I was looking through the viewfinder the whole time.
We're looking at images that you shot yourself as that 13-year-old little girl. You were interviewed for an article in the LA Times this week. In that article, it begins this way, saying, in 1963, a radio newsman, a schoolgirl, and a nurse were close to the action when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. What they saw still haunts them. Now, you were just 13. Is that article accurate? Does that memory still haunt you? What vividly can you recall from that moment in time?
Well, I wasn't where I could actually see the motorcade, or I couldn't see the limousine when the first gunshot sounded. The limousine turns that sharp corner there and goes down a hill, and there were people lining the street to my left, so all I could see was the back end of the limousine when I stopped taking the film. And it was about 2 seconds after that, I'm told, when the first gunshot sounded, and I thought it was firecrackers and someone was throwing firecrackers out of a window, so I glanced up quickly, but somebody, I don't know who, some man pulled me down to the ground, grabbed my arm and pulled me down to the ground and held on to me until he thought it was safe to get up. So as far as being haunted, oh, go ahead.
Tina, go ahead. What about being haunted by the memories that you were going to say?
Well, haunted is probably not a good word for me. I never felt like I was traumatized by it, and I think my age had something to do with that, and not being any closer to where the president was killed probably helped that feeling also.
And what do you make of the conspiracy theories and how people have discussed this over the last 5 decades of what really happened on that day? What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't really have a theory of my own, other than I don't think we really know what happened. I don't think we know yet what happened. But, and I really haven't kept up with all. There's so many conspiracy theories. I've heard a few and read a few books about it, and some of them sound plausible. But all I know is what I heard and what I saw that day and what my parents witnessed with me.
Well, you were a witness to this moment in our country's history, a sad and dark chapter for all of us. Tina Towner Pender, thank you for sharing your story with us. I appreciate your time today. Coming up, how that moment changed life in America forever. Presidential historian Michael Beschloss, Larry Sabato, whose new book about the assassination of JFK is a must-read, and they're both going to join me coming up to talk about what this day means and where we were then, where we're going now. We're right back after this.